Hey everybody, this is Kennedy Hawk from the Marvel Champions Monthly Fan Podcast team. Today we're going to go through another aspect Acumen video looking at the protection aspect. If you didn't see the basic and aggression one that I did before this in this series, what I'm going to do is as each hero releases, I'm going to do a video on the aspect that was packaged with that hero, talk about the different combos within the aspect and how to deck build with this sort of different approach. Instead of looking at cost curves like I normally do and considering every card in the card pool, what I'm going to do is look at distinct, niches or combos within an aspect and pick one or two, maybe even three of those to combine into a deck and see how well they gel. You can leave the cards in your collection sorted in these sort of little combo packets, and then you just grab a couple of them, mix them with the hero, and see how it goes. This one's a little bit different. With aggression, a lot of times what I had you do is say, okay, pick two of these little combo packets, combine all the cards in them, and see how the deck goes. With protection, a lot of the packets have so many cards that kind of do similar things that you almost have to choose what you want from each packet and maybe not take the full thing. So we'll talk about that as we go through. So the general idea here is you're going to pick a couple combinations of cards that you can combine together to create a cool deck. So I'm going to start with the defending decks. This is the protection aspect. Your whole goal is to mitigate damage, sustain hero form as long as possible to reduce threat because you don't have a ton of thwarting options, and really just mitigate damage so you don't have to flip to alter ego. So one of the most basic packages you can do for that is this defense basic package. So this is sort of a package of cards you're going to want to include with every hero that plans to defend a ton. And I even put energy barrier over here because energy barrier is so good. There's very little reasons to not run energy barrier in your deck. So we have electrostatic armor. Play under any player's control, max 1 per player. After you defend against an attack, deal 1 damage to the attacking character. Whether you're playing solo or multiplayer, your win condition is damaging the villain. So if you're planning to defend every round as your hero activation, rather than doing no damage, let's get a little bit of damage in there. And if you defend multiple times per round, that just gets even better and better and better. Armored Vest, obviously, you're going to want to increase your hero's defense. If you're planning to defend, you're going to be using that defense stat. You're probably not going to be using tough tokens, although you might add those into your deck and things like that to mitigate damage. So let's get that defense stat up as high as possible. This is really good in characters like Spider-Man, who has 3 innate defense, or She-Hulk, who has 2 to get your defense up to a 3 or 4. You can really stop a villain in their tracks by just pumping your defense with a real cheap upgrade. And then Energy Barrier, like I mentioned, this card is so useful. Yes, it costs 3 total, right? The 2 resources plus the card itself. But it's going to prevent 3 damage. So it's basically like using this 3 times. And it's going to deal 3 damage. So it's like using this 3 times. These stay out here forever. This only has 3 uses, but you're getting 6 uses out of the same cost of cards, and these technically cost 1 more, because to play both of them, you'd have to spend a resource on each one. So I really like Energy Barrier. It's obviously better in decks that care about energy resources and tech cards and upgrades, but it's good in general. Some pro moves with Energy Barrier are getting them out there with Iron Man early, using Shuri to fish them out of your deck when you need them, so you can recurse Shuri with Black Panther to keep putting out energy barriers. Really, really good. All right, so this is kind of like Retaliate. That was one thing I wanted to point out. A lot of characters have Retaliate. I think Wasp, Captain America, Black Panther all have some form of Retaliate within their hero kit. So if you can get this out there and defend, you're going to be dealing 2 damage instead of 1. That's just how you're going to push yourself to the end. I drew these little lines here because I think that if you're going to take this set, which a lot of protection decks will, you're probably going to choose one of these 2 paths. So there's the Defender upgrade, so that's upgrading your defense value to be able to do even more things with it, and to be a little bit more versatile with it. You're not necessarily going to up your defense value, the value exactly, but upgrade your utility of defending. So when you defend, obviously you exhaust, you're going to want some way to ready. Not every character is Spider-Man who has 3 inherent defense. Maybe you're playing someone with 1 inherent defense, like Captain Marvel, and you still want to play a protection deck and have to be able to defend every once in a while. Well, this is a way you can put an upgrade down ahead of time that lets you ready your hero so you can still use your 2 attack or 2 thwart on the next turn. Really powerful. There are some better cards than it nowadays, but the fact that it's an upgrade and you play it in advance means you preserve your hand for the future, so it's in this upgrading my defense utility sort of package. Counterpunch, obviously, again, just like Electrostatic armor, when you're defending, you still want to be able to punch the villain, you still want to be able to progress your win condition. This is doing just that. Really good, again, on characters like She-Hulk, really good on characters like even Spider-Man, who has 2 attack. If you have basically a 2 baseline attack, this card is probably worth including. Finally, Preemptive Strike. Now this card has a love-hate relationship with me. It was really great before they changed the defense ruling. The way that little defense and parentheses tag works now, and this kind of really hurts the protection aspect a little bit, is you can only use this card when you are the target of an attack. So the villain attacks you naturally, sure, you can use Preemptive Strike. If the villain attacks your buddy, you're not going to be able to cancel that boost card icon flip. But if you defend either yourself or with one of your allies, you will be able to cancel that flip. So you're going to have to use your defense stat and then play Preemptive Strike. Now that can still be very good, right? Rhino can get up to a pretty high base attack of 4, I think. So if Rhino comes swinging at you for 4 plus a boost card, you probably don't mind, like as Spider-Man, taking the attack, avoiding all Rhino's damage, and then Preemptive Striking the boost card. But it does take a little bit more effort to be able to play Preemptive Strike than it used to. Still, I think it's good in this deck. This is actually a card that could slot into either of these 2 rows. It's all about mitigating damage while it's coming in and dealing it back to the villain. The reason I think this card is really powerful is ultimately if you flip a 3 boost icon card and cancel it and deal 3 damage, you've done all the damage of Energy Barrier in one event. That's pretty good for like lower cost. Now you have to have the card in your hand, you have to be the target, there's all sorts of disclaimers on that label, but still a pretty good card. So that's one way you can go, upgrading your I'm going to defend. So if I'm defending a lot, I'm going to be the target a lot, I'm going to want to deal damage a lot, I'm going to want to ready a lot. But maybe I'm going to defend and I'm not going to mitigate all the damage because I'm not like the perfect defender. Well, this next row, Damageless Defender, they are the perfect defender. Just like Daredevil, perfect defender. So this is all about soaking attacks and making sure you take no damage. So again, you're going to want Armored Vests, so you're going to pair it with this kit. You're probably going to want Energy Barrier, and you put your Energy Barriers down and then hold them for whenever you like need an O crud button, like, oh, the villain accidentally got 1 damage through, let me Energy Barrier it so it's 0. The reason you want that is all of these cards have special triggers when you take no damage during an attack. So Desperate Defense, when your hero defends against an attack, it gets +2 defense for the attack. If no damage was dealt, ready your hero. That's really good, right? So Spider-Man is able to defend and ready. It has the same cost as Indomitable, but it gives you +2 defense. It doesn't have a guaranteed ready, so if the villain flips a really high boost card that you weren't expecting, it's not going to be perfect. But it is still another way to defend and then ready. So these 2 cards kind of compete for a deck slot in my mind. You could put all 6 in there, right, and have 6 cards that say when I defend, I ready. But now you're putting a lot of effort into your deck just to be able to ready when if 1 or 2 of them is better, it could work. A lot of times when I'm building a deck, I might even use all 3 of these packages. I might include 3 Desperate Defenses because I want to have those in my hand at the right time. And I might include 1 or 2 Indomitables because I don't need to have all 3 in my deck because I can play them ahead of time. Alright, Sidestep. This is a card from Quicksilver's pack. When you would take any amount of damage, prevent 3 of that damage. If you paid for this card using a lightning resource, deal 1 damage to an enemy. So 1 damage is only 1 damage, but you're preventing 3. The problem with this, again, is just like Preemptive Strike, you have to be the target of that attack. So you can't be doing this on someone, you can't do this on like Green Goblin when he flips and deals 4 damage to your hero. That's not an attack. You can't prevent that damage. This is actually really nice for killing minions or getting minions into the killable range. If you get a minion down to 1 and they're going to hit you 1 more time, you can avoid that minion's damage and kill it using Sidestep. Pretty neat. Definitely competing for Preemptive Strike in your deck slot. This one, only works against the villain. This one works against anybody. Both of these are ways you can deal damage even while stunned, so that's a little bit cool. But again, you need to take no damage. Well, you actually don't need to take no damage, but you ideally want to take no damage, and this is going to be one of those ways that you can make it so you take no damage. What's really nice about this is Desperate Defense you have to do when your hero defends, so that is before the boost card is flipped. This is after the boost card is flipped, so when you're about to take the damage, you can prevent 3 of it. That's really powerful. It synergizes well with Energy Barrier. They're doing kind of the same thing. And ultimately, this is the key piece to the Damageless Defense package. After you defend against an attack and take no damage, exhaust this card to draw 1 card. This is going to be your economy card, right? No other aspect has a card that is this good for draw that fits into their what they want to do, right? Aggression has something that's like when you attack something that's stunned or confused, draw a card. Okay, well you got to build your whole deck around that. You do with this too, but it's something that naturally fits into the aspect. And I think that it's probably one of those signature cards in protection that's going to be, people are going to be building decks around this card pretty much forever. All right, let's look through some other cards. I see I mislabeled this one. Sorry. So let's go through some of the other packages that you might include, and then we'll talk about some of those packages that you might not want to include everything of, and you might pick one or two things. So first, let's look at Dump and Chump. This is just a staple in almost every deck that exists. You want to have cheap allies that are able to block attacks for you. Now that's a little bit weird because with these aspect packages or combos in the middle here, you want to defend a lot, so you don't need a lot of Dump and Chump. But there are other ways you can play protection and ways you can play in general where you might want to use these allies. Maybe you want to soak attacks so you can play Preemptive Strike, but you don't want to waste your defense. So instead, you could waste Clea's defense, because when she's eliminated, she gets shuffled right back into her deck. So she's pretty great. And these are churn and burn characters. They're going to come back time and time again. We have multiple man. If you put 3 of him in your deck, you're going to be able to pay 4 to get 3 chump blockers. That's 3 attacks you can soak in the future for using Preemptive Strike. Really, 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 really good for helping you become the target. I almost put one of these flex characters in here, and we'll talk about these flex cards at the end. These are cards that they're pretty good cards, but you really have to think long and hard before you decide whether you're going to include them in your deck. And we'll go over why that is here soon. This next row is control. So this is all about controlling the villain and deciding what the villain's going to do. You can use things like Get Behind Me to cancel treachery cards and trigger more attacks. This can still combo well with your defense package because now you're getting attacked again. So if you defend again, you can use electrostatic armor to do damage. You can use sidestep to avoid the damage from that attack. Very good synergistic way to control what the villain's doing. A lot of treacheries out there are much worse than the villain attacking you, especially when you're playing protection and you know you have those cards to mitigate the attack in your hand or maybe on the field. Next, let's look at Black Widow. She's very similar, and I don't think these compete with deck slots. I think they're complementary. Black Widow, when a card is revealed from the encounter deck, exhaust Black Widow and spend 1 mental resource. Cancel the effects of that card, then reveal another card. So a lot of people are hung up in this then reveal another card. With almost every deck you build, there's going to be 2 to 3 cards in the encounter deck that just ruin your day. They just wreck your board state and set you back like you just got knocked back to the beginning of the game. That's when you use Black Widow. You shouldn't be canceling things like Assault and, rinky-dink treachery cards with Black Widow. You should be canceling things like Shadows of the Past and Caught Off Guard, discarding like a key upgrade and things like that. There are definitely some powerful cards that you can cancel, and there's cards that protection is specifically weak against that you might want to cancel. It really stinks to have to defend against a minion, right? Obviously, you'd rather defend against the villain, so if a bunch of minions flood you, Black Widow's a way to cancel a minion and turn it into a treachery, maybe a treachery which you can turn into a defense. Again, same thing for side schemes. You're not going to be the greatest thwarter in the world. There are very few cards here that remove threat other than just keeping you in hero form. So if a giant side scheme comes out with a crisis icon on it or a hazard icon, you're probably going to want to Black Widow that card because anything else you draw is probably going to be better for you. And yes, if you do this 100 times, 15 of those times you're going to draw a worse card, but 85 of those times you're going to draw a card that's better for your situation. And that's where Black Widow's really worth it. So this is one aspect of control, controlling what's coming out of the encounter deck. The other aspect is controlling what the villain's doing. And this half doesn't jive as well with this defense package, but it can in multiplayer. So let's look at Iron Fist. He is a pretty expensive ally, but he comes at the 6 attack for 3 hits. He also has this Mystic counter ability, which adds 2 damage to basically the first 2 attacks and a stun. So he can really do 8 damage for 4 cost and stun the enemy twice. That's really, really good. You can even use, since it's only 2 Mystic counters, you can use that last activation as a chump block, so you could do 6 damage, 2 stuns, and a chump block for 4 cost. There's very few cards in the game that are as powerful as Iron Fist, and there's a reason for it. Now, the disadvantage of this is if you're stunning the villain, that means you're not going to be able to trigger all these abilities against the villain, because you won't have to defend against them. The good news is, in multiplayer, you might have to do all those things, right? If you stun the villain for your attack, and now player B gets attacked, you can now defend, soaking that attack, blah, 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 blah. You can also do it the other way around. You could stun when player B is about to be the first player. So Rhino loses that stun token against player A or player B. It now goes to you, player A's turn, and now Rhino attacks you. You've mitigated an entire attack on your friend without having to defend, and now you get to defend against your own attack. So stun can really be powerful and still synergize with this, but it's a little bit more tricky to get it to work. And here's another one. This is one that really works with this package here. Never Back Down, another Quicksilver card. When you defend against an attack, you get +2 for this attack. So again, you're playing this up here with Desperate Defense before the boost card is flipped. If you take no damage, stun the attacking enemy. Amazing. So you can stun the enemy mid-villain phase with this card, which is really, really powerful. Let's say you play that and then flip a Horrible Treachery card. Well, that's going to absorb your stun token, but Get Behind Me just turned into Cancel a Treachery. Probably the most powerful card or combo in the game at that point. So amazing. All right, so that's Control, Dump and Chump. Let's go through a few more. Let's look at the Energy package. This is another package, much like Damageless Defense and much like Defense Basic package. You're going to build a whole deck around. And you're going to build the deck around this signature ally, Nova. He has 1 thwart, 2 attack, 3 health, and an amazing ability. When an enemy initiates an attack against you, spend a Lightning Bolt resource or an Energy resource to deal 2 damage to that enemy. You can kill enemies mid-attack with this. So that's pretty amazing, right? If Hydra Bomber's coming at you, you spend a Lightning Bolt, you kill Hydra Bomber, you don't take the damage, and Nova didn't even have to exhaust to do that, so he can still attack on the next turn. And there's no limit 1 per phase. You can do this, if there's 4 minions in front of you and the villain, you could do this 5 times in 1 turn for your 5 resources for the turn. That's amazing. You're probably going to want to take enhanced reflexes and some like resource generators that are wilds so that you can just pump them into Nova turn after turn after turn, Quinn Carrier, whatever. So the problem with this is it does require an energy resource, and it's taking income out of your hand during the villain phase. So, you know, if you use Counter Punch, and you also use Preemptive Strike, you've now spent 1, 2, 3 cards during the villain phase. If you spend another card to pay a Lightning Bolt for Nova, you've now spent 4 cards during the villain phase. So it gets to the hero phase, and you say, okay, I attack with my hero and I'm done. That can be boring for some people, but it's still really, really powerful. And a lot of the best cards in Protection are actually energy resources. We're looking at Energy Barrier. We're looking at Indomitable, like Guaranteed Readying. Later we'll look at, Luke Cage and some other really powerful cards that have that energy symbol. You can build a whole deck with 25 energy cards at this point in Protection and Basic and have a really powerful deck that's all keyed around getting Nova in play and just doing that auto damage every turn, defending and making sure the villain doesn't hit you, every once in a while doing something to thwart. Alright, so the cards that go in that package, they've been included in other packages, right? Because we've talked about 2 great energy resource cards. I would say Indomitable and Energy Barrier. Alright, so those were all the packages where you might include like a whole package together in a combination. Next, I have 3 here that are maybe a little bit less include all the cards at once and more of a pick your favorite card from these packages. So first, Tough Enough. There's such a thing as too many tough tokens, right? You can't have a second tough token on top of your initial tough token. So if you're running a lot of cards that provide tough, like Muster Courage, play only if you have the Adventurous trait. In Expert mode, you could give up to 3 tough statuses to characters out there. You could make all of your multiple men tough. That's really, really good in Expert mode. But if you make a character tough and then stun the villain, they don't attack. Now you've got this tough token on you. Next turn, you draw a bunch of more cards that give you tough. Maybe there's such a thing as too much tough. And there's the same thing for stun and confused. Eventually, you're just not getting the value out of a card you're playing. So you probably want to pick 1 to 2 cards out of this package if you're going to include it in your little combo situation. Muster Courage is a really good card. At the same time, it's really expensive, and it has the least optimal resource type for Protection. There's, I think, 1 card that combos with it, so not amazing. At the same time, Perseverance requires you to flip, and you only get 1 tough token, but it's really cheap. So if you're playing one of those flipping heroes like Miss Marvel, like She-Hulk, that doesn't want to exhaust to defend because they have powerful stats, this can be one way to not have to take damage, but still get that defense in. And then finally, there's the ally from the core set, Luke Cage. He doesn't give you tough, but he has tough himself. So he's a really good way to eliminate things like Rhino's Charge and giant attacks with Overkill from Kang. Give characters tough, have an ally with tough, soak up that attack. Have that utility somewhere within your deck. Alright, next is Hero Sustain. You could make a deck that is all about healing like a crazy person. But that's probably not a deck that's going to win a ton of games unless you're playing in multiplayer. So Med Team, really, really good. Advantages of Med Team, you're paying 4 resources to heal 6 over the course of a game. And you could heal allies. Allies are some of the most powerful characters in the game, right? If you want to keep Luke Cage around longer, just keep healing him with Med Team. If you want to do that with one of the basic allies, or Brother Voodoo, because he's got 2 thwart. This can turn into 6 thwart over 3 turns out of Brother Voodoo. That's really strong. You can also use it on heroes in a pinch, so it's very versatile. In comparison, Second Wind is heal 4 damage from any identity. Same cost, 5 if you paid with a mental resource. But that means you're getting less healing, but it's all at once. But it's also limited to just identities, so just you or another player. It is not a hero action, so you could do this in alter ego form. I mean, if you're going to alter ego form, you're probably recovering, so it really doesn't matter. Alright, so we've got a couple other healing cards here. We have Night Nurse. She can heal and remove status tokens. Again, limited to an identity or a hero even, so you can't even hit people in alter ego form. But you can remove horrible things like Stun and Confuse, so pretty good. Unfortunately, if you only have Tough and you want to use this to heal yourself, you're going to be removing your Tough card, so be on the watch out for that. And Unique, so you can only have 1 in your deck. And then finally, Momentum Shift. Here's an interesting one. The attack is that you heal 2 damage from your hero, so you can only do this if you have damage on you, and then you push that damage onto an enemy. So there's a couple cool things about this card. It's cheaper than these other 2, but it does a little bit less on the healing side, but it does progress your win condition. And in a pinch, you can use this to clear stunned, so not the end of the world to include this card. You're probably not going to want to go all in on healing unless you're making some multiplayer healing deck. And there's certain cards that aren't going to synergize well. You probably don't want to give yourself a ton of Tough and then depend on Night Nurse for healing. If you're going to run Med Team, you probably want to run pretty ally heavy, and you want to avoid allies that only have 2 health because it's kind of wasted on Black Widow, even though she has 2 thwart. You probably want to include someone like Brother Voodoo so you can get full value out of that. Although I guess there you're still just getting 2 thwart, so maybe it doesn't matter if you're wasting it on 1 for Black Widow. But again, probably not a full package kind of deal. This last one, this could be a full package, and this is another one where you might build a whole deck around this. This is when you want to play protection, but you don't really want to defend. Maybe you got a really crummy defense stat like Captain Marvel. You want to use all the great lightning bolts that are in protection, all the energy resources, but you don't want to have to exhaust your hero to defend, because who would ever want to do that? Green cards are gross. Here you're going to include a lot of mitigation that doesn't require you to be defending. So energy barrier can avoid any type of damage. You can stay upright as a hero, being ready to attack or thwart, and mitigate some of that damage. If you get 3 energy barriers out of there, right, you can really mitigate that. And if you look at like combining this with something like Preemptive Strike, you can mitigate that damage when you're taking damage without having to defend. You just have to be the target, even though it's a defense event. So good mitigation. Defensive Stance, similar situation. When you would take any amount of damage, discard Defensive Stance to prevent 3 of that. So if you have this out there and a couple energy barriers, you can take a 6 damage attack and take no damage without even defending. So this is the I want to play a protection player, but I don't want to defend sort of chunk. And again, this is going to combine really well with these tough tokens, right? You can just soak that attack, not have to exhaust from Claw, not have to do anything fancy unless some sort of boost icon comes out or boost ability comes out that ruins your day. So a defenseless protection deck. So let's take a minute here and talk through these flex cards. These are cards that they don't necessarily fit in a single kit, and they don't fit in a kit in every style of deck. So let's talk through them. First here is Warlock. Warlock's an interesting puzzle. He costs 4, because if you count himself, and he has 1 thwart or 1 attack. He can basically stay out forever as long as you're willing to fund him for a mental resource to heal 2 onto him. So you use him twice to thwart, you pay a mental to bring him back up. But he's only thwarting for 1 every turn. So it's not like he's going crazy with his thwart. So you can pay a mental resource to, over the next 2 turns, remove 2 threat. That's setting yourself up for a real long game. I think once we get a few more upgrades for allies, or things like from Wasp's pack Boot Camp, this could be a little more useful. Maybe we'll get like a thwart version of Boot Camp that makes Warlock really awesome. Right now, he's not that great. I mean, he is passive threat removal, so I can't complain about that. I pay a mental resource every other turn to keep removing that auto threat every round. But auto threat is eventually still going to thwart you out when you draw things like advance in the villain schemes, or mind ray in the villain schemes, or if you ever have to flip to alter ego, heaven forbid, in protection. So he doesn't have like a distinct deck that he fits in. He can be used cool with, muster courage. He can be used cool with med team, although you have an inherent way to heal him, so maybe not so much. He's kind of in an awkward position right now where he doesn't have, a deck that he fits in perfectly. So that's Warlock. He's kind of in an awkward position. Expert Defense. Here's another one. When your hero defends against an attack, it gets +3 defense. So again, you have to play this before you flip the boost card. I mean, it's cheap, right? It costs 0, which is pretty nice. But Desperate Defense for 1 more is going to ready your hero. And it gives you 1 less defense, but there's very few situations where this Expert Defense, is really necessary. If you could do it after you flip the boost card, kind of like Sidestep, be really powerful. But right now, it's kind of in an awkward position. It could fit as a one of or a couple of in one of these decks, but you got to draw it at the right time, and that's just real hard to do. So these are the oddballs for now. These next 4 definitely have their positions, so power protection can be really good. But if we look at some of these packages here, like let's consider these 6 cards and these 3. If I was going to include those 9 cards in my deck to make this Ultimate Defender package, only one of those cards costs more than 1, so power protection barely has any targets where it counts as 2 resources. At the same time, if I'm going to make, some pro healer package or some really good energy package, here maybe it makes sense. It can help with Nova, it can help with energy barrier, it can count as a lightning bolt itself for Nova, so it can become really powerful in other packages that have, higher cost cards. But in this, core protection defending package, this is pretty much just used to dump allies out. All right, Brother Voodoo. He's another really interesting one. So his response really puzzles me. After Brother Voodoo enters play, search the top 5 cards of your deck for an event card and add it to your hand. Shuffle your deck. That's really cool, right? Because you can know what's coming up ahead of time. But the problem with that is most heroes draw to 5 cards anyway. So you might think, oh, I'll play this and I'll draw a counterpunch to use against the villain. Well, you were going to draw that counterpunch anyway. So, I mean, all he really did was give you the counterpunch a little bit early so you have some like forward-thinking knowledge. He does work really well with some things, like he works really well with Perseverance, because you can draw into Perseverance, you play him in Alter Ego mode, draw into Perseverance, and then flip. That could be really powerful. Maybe you play him in Alter Ego mode, draw into Momentum Shift, decide, okay, well I don't have to recover, because once I flip, I can play Momentum Shift to heal instead. So he can be used with those sort of like active events, but not so much with these other ones. There are situations where he could be. There's ways you can make the villain attack you during the villain phase, whether it be from Wrecking Crew or other abilities. If you can make the villain attack you in the hero phase, then he might have some use with some of these defense-styled events. But for the most part, you want to be looking at active events with him, events that you would play during the hero phase. And right now, that's pretty much limited to Perseverance, Muster Courage, Momentum Shift, maybe Second Wind. I don't know. It's kind of a bad card too, so maybe not. Tackle is going to be the next card we talk with, so he can work well with that. But for the most part, I mean, he's drawing you a card you were going to get anyway, so kind of a feel bad. He can be used really well with some basic events. So one of my favorite things to do with him is to find an Earth's Mightiest Heroes and then use him to ready my hero. So I paid 3 for a ready, but that ready later counts for 2 thwart and a block. That's really good. I like that. So kind of a puzzling character that has some spots. Here's another one, Tackle. Pay 3 resources plus this card. Stun an enemy. If you paid for this using a physical resource, deal 3 damage to an enemy. So first of all, there's not a ton of physical resources that are amazing. I mean, we got Counterpunch, we got Momentum Shift, Black Widow, and some allies that are probably going to be in play. So by doing this 3 damage to get the stun, you're throwing your Counterpunch away or something like that. But on top of that, you're paying 4 resources to deal 3 damage and a stun. For the same cost, you could pay for Iron Fist. His first attack would do 3 damage and a stun, and then he's got 2 more attacks after that. Kind of a feel bad, right? I mean, there's so many cards that are cheaper or the same cost, but provide more benefit or the exact same thing that it makes me think, okay, well, why am I running Tackle? This can be really useful in a stun lock deck with like Miss Marvel or with Captain America, where you want to make sure every time you draw a hand of cards, you have a way to stun lock the villain. But for the most part, I like these other 2 stunning cards better within protection, but still has some really interesting uses. And if you're playing a hero that really struggles with damage, like Black Widow, I mean, maybe you just need that extra boost of damage, so you include this card. But I found most of the times I include this card nowadays, it just becomes a resource in my deck. So Better off with something else. Next, we have Nerves of Steel from the Quicksilver pack. This is like the martial prowess for protection. Generate a lightning bolt resource for defense event. So that can be really good because we can now make our preemptive strikes free. We can make our desperate defenses free. We can make our sidesteps free and trigger that ability. So this is like a really good card, but it's very situational where you include it. I could have put it in either of these rows, right? They both have events that trigger with that. It also works well with Don't Back Down. It doesn't work well with every protection deck, though. It's not going to help you with Get Behind Me. It's not going to help you with Perseverance. A Quinn carrier would definitely be better, right? Because they would work with everything. It costs one more and it's unique, so it's got some disadvantages too. Ultimately, a card you probably want to include with this Defender package, especially if you're going to include Sidestep, Desperate Defense, and maybe even Preemptive Strike. You could have 9 targets for this card. With these cards, what I like to do is I like to have them when I have 5 targets at least. So there's 5 cards cycling through my deck that Nerves of Steel is going to be able to activate. That way, once my deck is thinned down to 30-ish cards, every round I'm drawing something that Nerves of Steel will trigger. A lot easier with, attacking and thwarting versions of this than it is with the defending version of this, but still useful. My favorite use for this card is one of the reasons I sort of dislike the aspect protection is I hate spending all my cards during the villain turn. A lot of this is, wasting all my resources during the villain's turn. It gets to my turn, all I get to do is attack or thwart, use my allies, and pass. It's real boring in multiplayer. Well, if you have Nerves of Steel out there, now you can play one of these 3 cards every villain phase and only lose that card instead of losing 2 cards from your hand and nerfing yourself down to 3 cards. Or, heaven forbid, if you wanted to play 2 of these cards, you'd have to spend this card and this one and 1 extra card, but you'd still end up with 2 cards in your hand and one of those 5-card hand-size heroes. So it can be really helpful for helping you feel like you get to do a little bit more during that hero phase and not just have all your resources devoted to doing things in the villain phase, although there's lots of people that like to do that, so that's totally understandable too. But kind of one that you have to build the rest of your deck and then decide, do I belong in this deck or do I belong somewhere else? So this was my aspect Acumen on protection. We are now going to build a Spider-Man protection deck using this sort of concept. All right, so let's build that Spider-Man protection deck. We're going to try to build a Spider-Man protection deck and a Captain Marvel protection deck, just so we can look at the differences. So first, let's look through Spider-Man's kit. We've got minimal threat control, but we do have really good stuff for taking no damage from an attack when we are the target, so that's good to know. We've got some control, so we've got lots of things that we could synergize around. Some resource generation, some stunned. He's kind of like the ultimate protection character, right? You've got big damaging events to help you catch up. You've got resources to pay for those things during the villain phase, so you don't have to spend all your cards. You've got some control here with stunning and with enhanced spider senses. You've got some healing with Aunt May. You're just the ultimate protection machine here. And you've even got backflips in here. So you can kind of do everything protection can do already. So we're going to use protection to augment Spider-Man Peter Parker's kit. So the first thing I want to do here is I want to include Brother Voodoo in my deck. And the reason I'm going to include him is I want to be able to fish up these swinging web kicks whenever I can. I can use Brother Voodoo when I'm in alter ego form and try to draw the right cards at the right time to deal damage. So we're going to include him, and we want to make sure we have 5 targets like we talked about before. So I'm also going to focus a little bit on hero sustainment, and I'm going to include 2 copies of Perseverance. I'm doing this because I'm going to flip a lot when I take damage to use Aunt May to heal, and I want to make sure that Brother Voodoo has 5 events that he can target that are useful to have in my hand during the hero phase. So let's group the rest of this stuff up here soon, and we'll see what else we're going to do. We are going to be the ultimate defender, so I'm definitely going to include my defense basic package. I'm just going to put 1 of each of these in here, and I will put 3 copies of Energy Barrier. I'm going to start gathering my cards that cost 2+ to see if I can justify including a Power of Protection. But first, let's grab our mayonnaise, as Americana would say, our basic cards that we want to include in this deck. So there's some choices we're going to make here. I took 2 of the basic packages, the Instant Income and the Hero Sustain package. I think I'm definitely going to include Endurance. I'm probably not going to include Downtime, because if I'm going to flip to Alter Ego, I'm probably not going to take a recovery action. I'm just going to let Aunt May handle that. I'm not going to include First Aid for the same reason. I have much better healing options here, but I will include my 3 basic resources. So not a ton of basic cards. We're up to 12 cards out of the 25 we got to include. So like I said, we're going to be Ultimate Defender. That means we're definitely going to take Unflappable. We're definitely going to take a a handful of desperate defenses, but actually I think I'm going to take Indomitable and go with this second row for Peter, and we'll go over the reason for that. So what I did is I included 3 copies of Indomitable, 1 copy of Unflappable, 3 copies of Counterpunch, and 3 copies of Preemptive Strike. So let's group all that up and make sure those numbers add up. 3, 3, 3, 1. So I lied about something. Oh no, yeah, only 1 Unflappable. So we're good to go. These all cost 2 or less. So we're looking at 18, 22 cards out of our 25, and we've only got 4 that cost more than 4. That's pretty bad. We don't have a lot of allies yet, and we probably have to include that. So I'm going to include some cheap allies like Clea. I'm going to include Iron Fist just for the stun, and we'll talk about why. Just trying to get to a few more targets that power of protection actually becomes useful. But ultimately here, we've got 24 cards. I think rather than power of protection, I am going to potentially take the defense event card because we've got 3 preemptive strikes. You know what, that's only got 3 targets, so we're going to include a power of protection instead. Call it a day. So there's our 25 cards. Let's just lay them out over here so everybody can see exactly what we included in this Spider-Man deck, and we can talk through a few of the combos really quick. Apologize for my tabletop simulator being all ugly like that. I don't know what is going on here. So we've got a couple allies in here. We didn't go ally crazy, just 4 allies. We've got 3 copies of Energy Barrier to mitigate damage. We've got lots of resource generation up here with our 3 basic resources and our web shooters. Here's some more resources. Oh, that was the entire stack. That's not what we wanted to do. Some more resources. We've got some healing and support. We've got some damage dealing. So let's put our damage dealing stuff over here so we know what's going on. This is kind of a mix of mitigation and damage dealing, so we'll put it on a row in the middle. All right, this is going to be, again, a mix of mitigation and damage dealing. It's going to encourage us to defend, but also ready up. Here's more resources and income, some defense stat pumping, and some tough cards to play when we need them. All right, so let's look through some of the combos here. We've got lots of cool stuff going on. So we can get up to 4 defense and then counter punch for 2 using Spider-Man. If we get to 4 defense, we can cancel any treachery cards come up. I think the highest attacking villain has 4 attack right now. Ultron can get more if you let drones build up, but luckily we've got Black Cat to sort of take care of drones that are coming out. So that means you could do your basic defense and then just count on preemptive strike to cancel whatever comes out of the boost card, and you can probably trigger Unflappable for a damageless defense. We've also got Perseverance in here, so this can be a cool multiplayer deck. You can throw tough on yourself, let the villain attack you, and then defend for your play partner. Or when your play partner is going to be the first player, you can use someone like Iron Fist or like Webbed Up to cancel an attack on their turn and then defend on your turn. I think even though Webbed Up does a lot of controlling and stunning, Iron Fist still works well with it, because if you somehow get Webbed Up onto the villain and already had Iron Fist in play, he can throw a stun on top of Web Up, and that cancels 3 attacks in a row, which is just bonkers crazy. The one thing this doesn't have a ton of is threat removal. You're really counting on these spider tracers and your allies to do a little bit of threat removal. So you're going to have to take very decided turns into alter ego form, use that resource, probably use Aunt May to heal up and flip back up, because you're really going to struggle a little bit with thwart in this deck, but luckily we've got lots of things that let us sustain hero form to keep us squared away. Alright, next let's build a Captain Marvel deck using this same concept. So here you can see Captain Marvel's kit is laid out. We've got a ton of threat control between Confusion and 3 copies of Crisis Interdiction. We've got lots of income with Alpha Flight Station and Energy Absorption, and we've got some big damaging attacks. These can do up to 10, these can do 5 in a card draw, and some defensive stuff. So kind of hitting all 4 areas of expertise, Carol Danvers, Captain Marvel, which is great. So, Let's build with this energy deck build that we talked about earlier with Captain Marvel, because she loves energy resources for this energy channel. So we're going to build all around Nova and make this awesome cosmic 1-2 punch. We're going to include 3 copies of Energy Barrier, because that mitigates damage and doesn't require Captain Marvel to use her defense stat. At the same time, we could get Captain Marvel up to 3 defense, so defending isn't the end of the world. But let's look at what other energy options we have for Captain Marvel here. We have quite a few, actually. So let's be sure to include Luke Cage, another expensive ally. We've got 2 expensive allies at this point, so I'm inclined to think that we're going to need Power of Protection here. It's also going to trigger all 3 um, energy barriers, so if we can get 2 more cards in there, it's going to be worth it already, and I think that that's pretty easy to do. I'm going to include 2 copies of Desperate Defensive Stance because it helps us. It's basically another copy of Captain Marvel's Flight, Cosmic Flight, which lets us prevent 3 damage for 2 cost in advance. We've now got 7 cards that triggers. Let's group all of this up. So we've got 9. We've got to get quite a few more cards in here, and we want to optimize how many energy resources we are including. So I am going to sort of build into this defensive package. You're going to have to get Captain Marvel's helmet out to get this combination to really work. But I'm going to include 3 copies of Indomitable, because even though Captain Marvel wants to defend, her base stats of 2 thwart and 2 attack are really useful. We don't want to ignore those. I'm going to include 3 copies of Preemptive Strike, because again, we can use these when the villain is attacking us, even if we decide not to defend, as damage mitigation. We're now up to 15. We want to make sure we include our 3 resources here. And I'm going to include 2 copies of Endurance, 1 for myself, and 1 is just an energy resource. At this point, we're looking at some other things that we want to do in the deck beyond just those defending situations that we had talked about. I think we can look at including things like Clea so that we have more chump blocking, and maybe we'll even go with Multiple Man and include 3 copies of Multiple Man so that we have chump blockers available to us when we need them. We've got room for 1 more card here. What I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to put in 1 copy of Armored Vest, because that does let us get Captain Marvel to 4 defense. If all the stars align, we could have a 4 defense hero that is not Spider-Man, with all the advantages of having good thwart events, good attack events, a good ally, and good defensive events. Could be a pretty rockstar deck. So that was one way I built that deck. Let's just quickly look at this deck here, at the cards that ended up in there. I think we ended up with very few that weren't energy resources or couldn't count as energy resources. So we had our 2 basic resources, Multiple Man, Armored Vest, and Clea. So you've got 7 cards that you've included that didn't generate an energy resource. That's pretty baller. I'm pretty happy with that. And that's a Captain Marvel protection deck with 40 cards in it. So we'll save both these decks and try them out later this week on stream and see how they go. Hope everybody can tune in then. Thanks for watching this Aspect Acumen video. In a couple of weeks here, it looks like Scarlet Witch is going to come out, and then we'll do one of these videos on the Justice aspect.